The moment Ethan Cole heard the metal snap inside his truck's engine, he knew his luck had finally run out. Stranded on a dirt road with no signal, no money, and a son waiting 200 miles away, he slumped against the steering wheel and felt the weight of every failure pressed down on his chest. He was 32 years old and had nothing left to give. Then he heard it, the angry growl of a tractor engine fighting to stay alive. Through the dust and dying sunlight, he saw her. A woman wrestling with a machine twice her size, losing the battle but refusing to quit. If you want to see how a broken man and a failing farm saved each other, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The tractor bucked like a wild animal, and Lila Hart gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. Black smoke belched from the exhaust, and the entire frame shuddered as if it might tear itself apart. She'd been fighting this machine for 20 minutes, trying to finish the last row before the sun went down. But the old engine had other plans. Come on, she muttered through gritted teeth, jamming the clutch and throttle in a rhythm she'd learned from her father. The tractor lurched forward another 10 feet, then started to die again. That's when she saw him. A man stood at the edge of the field, silhouetted against the fading orange sky. His truck sat crooked on the road behind him, hood popped open, steam rising into the air. He looked like he'd been standing there a while, just watching her lose this fight. Lila killed the engine and climbed down, wiping grease and sweat from her forehead. Her boots hit the dirt hard, and she started walking toward him, suspicious. Strangers didn't just appear out here. This was 30 miles from anywhere that mattered. "You need help?" she called out, her voice flat and unwelcoming. The man didn't move right away. He had dark hair that needed cutting, a worn flannel shirt, and the kind of exhaustion in his eyes that came from more than just a long day. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. "My truck's done. Engine seized. I was hoping I could use a phone." Lila stopped about 15 feet from him, arms crossed. "No signal out here. Nearest town's back the way you came." "I know. I passed it an hour ago." She studied him carefully. He didn't look dangerous, just tired, defeated even. But she'd learned the hard way that men who showed up unannounced usually wanted something. "Can't help you," she said, turning back toward the tractor. "Sorry. That's a 1985 John Deere 4450, he said suddenly. 4-cylinder turbocharged diesel. You're running it too lean, that's why it's smoking." Lila stopped mid-step. She turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "What?" "Your fuel mixture," he continued, nodding toward the tractor. "The injector pump's probably shot, or someone tried to tune it without knowing what they were doing. Either way, you keep running it like that, you'll blow the whole thing in a week." She stared at him, caught between suspicion and something close to hope. "You know tractors?" "I know engines." He paused, glancing at his ruined truck. "Used to fix them for a living, before everything went to hell." Lila hesitated. Every instinct told her to send him walking, but she'd been fighting this farm alone for too long. The bank was breathing down her neck, the equipment was falling apart, and she was 2 bad weeks away from losing everything her father had built. "You hungry?" she asked finally. He blinked, surprised. "I don't want to. I'm not offering charity. You fix that tractor tonight, I'll feed you and let you sleep in the barn. Tomorrow, you're on your way. Deal?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Deal." The farmhouse was small and weathered, with peeling paint and a sagging porch that creaked under their weight. Inside, it was clean but sparse, hardly any furniture, nothing on the walls except a faded photograph of a man standing next to the same tractor Ethan had just seen in the field. "That your father?" he asked, nodding toward the picture. Lila didn't look at it. "Yeah, he died 3 years ago. Heart attack." She pulled 2 mismatched plates from the cabinet. "You eat chicken?" "I eat anything." She heated up leftovers in silence while Ethan washed his hands at the sink. He noticed the stack of overdue bills on the counter, the empty cabinets, the way she moved through the kitchen like someone who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "I manage." "That's not what I asked." Lila set the plates down harder than necessary. "Yes, alone. My father left me the farm, the debt, and every broken piece of equipment he couldn't afford to replace. The bank wants their money by the end of the month, or they take it all. So if you're here to judge, you can skip dinner and go straight to the barn." Ethan raised his hands. "I'm not judging." She sat down across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The only sound was the ticking of an old clock on the wall. "You said you had a son," Lila said suddenly. "Where is he?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "With my sister, 2 hours north. I was on my way back when the truck died." "On your way back from where?" "Job interview. Didn't get it." He took a bite of chicken, chewing slowly. "Story of my life lately." Lila studied him across the table. "What happened? Long version or short version? Whichever one explains why you look like you haven't slept in a month." Ethan set down his fork and leaned back in the chair. "Short version, I had a good job as a mechanic. Got laid off when the shop closed. My wife left a year before that, said she didn't sign up for this life. Took off. Haven't heard from her since. So now it's just me and my boy, Lucas. He's 7, and I've been failing him every day since." The honesty hit harder than Lila expected. She looked down at her plate, suddenly aware of how similar their situations were. Both drowning. Both too proud to ask for help. "You're not failing him," she said quietly. "You're still fighting." Ethan met her eyes, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding that neither of them wanted to name yet. "So," he said, breaking the tension, "tell me about this tractor." Debt. They worked until midnight. Ethan stripped down the fuel injection system while Lila held the flashlight, her hand steady even though her arms were starting to shake from exhaustion. He explained everything as he went, his voice calm and methodical, like teaching someone a language they'd forgotten. "See this?" He held up a corroded valve. "This is your problem. Fuel's not flowing clean. You're starving the engine. Can you fix it?" "Not tonight. I'd need parts. But I can rig it enough to get you through the week." He glanced at her. "After that, you'll need a real repair, or a new tractor." Lila laughed bitterly. "Yeah, I'll just pull $5,000 out of my pocket." "You got any other equipment?" "A combine that barely runs, a truck older than I am, and an irrigation system held together with duct tape and prayers." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, thinking, "What's the bank threatening you with? Foreclosure? Unless I can prove the farm's viable. They want to see profits, improvements, something that says I'm not just bleeding money into dirt." She sat down on an overturned crate, exhausted. "I've got 30 days. Maybe less. And if you don't make it? Then I lose everything my father spent his life building, and I go back to being nobody, with nothing." Ethan looked around the barn, the rusted tools, the cracked concrete, the equipment that should have been retired a decade ago. Any sane person would walk away, cut their losses, start over somewhere easier. But he wasn't sane anymore, and he recognized the look in her eyes because he saw it in the mirror every morning. "What if I stayed?" he said suddenly. Lila's head snapped up. "What?" "Not forever, just until the bank inspection. A month, maybe less. I fix your equipment, reinforce the safety systems, make this place look like it's not about to collapse. In exchange, you let me stay in the barn, give me meals, and maybe a little cash if you can spare it." "I can't pay you. I can barely feed myself." "Then don't. I'll work for room and board, and when it's over, I'll leave. No strings." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've got nowhere else to be. Because my son deserves a father who doesn't look like he's given up. And because—" He hesitated. "Because you remind me of someone." "Who?" "Me." Before I stopped fighting, Lila stood up slowly, and for the first time since her father died, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. "1 month," she said. "If you screw me over, I will bury you in this field." Ethan almost smiled. "Fair enough?" They shook hands, and in that moment, neither of them realized they'd just made the most important decision of their lives. The next morning, Ethan called his sister from Lila's landline. The conversation was short and tense. "You're staying where?" Rebecca's voice crackled through the receiver. "A farm, about 30 miles outside Ridgemont. I got a job fixing equipment." "Ethan, you don't have time for this. You need to find something stable, something with benefits." "I know, this is temporary, just a month." "And Lucas? He asks about you every day." The guilt hit like a punch to the chest. "I know. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm working on something good. I'll call him tonight." "You better." After he hung up, Lila handed him a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. Everything okay? Yeah, my sister's just worried. She should be. You're sleeping in a barn and working for free. I've done worse. They spent the morning walking the property. Lila showed him everything: the irrigation lines that leaked, the fence posts rotting at the base, the storage shed with a roof that wouldn't survive the next storm. Every problem she pointed out felt like another weight added to an already crushing load. Your father built all this himself? Ethan asked. Most of it. He was stubborn, refused to hire help even when he should have. She paused. Guess I got that from him. Stubbornness isn't always bad. It is when it kills you. They stopped at the edge of the northern field, where the soil looked darker, richer. Lila knelt down and ran her fingers through the dirt, and for the first time, Ethan saw something other than exhaustion in her face. He saw love. This is what matters, she said quietly. Not the house, not the equipment. This, the land. My father used to say that if you take care of the soil takes care of you. You believe that? I have to. Ethan crouched beside her, looking out at the expanse of earth that stretched toward the horizon. Then let's make sure you get to keep it. By the end of the first week, Ethan had made enough repairs to buy them some breathing room. The tractor ran smoother, the irrigation system stopped hemorrhaging water, and he'd reinforced the barn's support beams before they collapsed entirely. Lila worked alongside him every step of the way, learning as she went, asking questions that showed how desperately she wanted to understand her own land. They didn't talk much about their pasts. The work was enough. But in the quiet moments, over breakfast, during water breaks, in the evenings when the sun turned the fields gold, small truths slipped out. Lucas asked if I was coming home soon, Ethan said one night as they sat on the porch steps. What did you tell him? That I'm building something, that it won't be long. Lila looked at him. You miss him. Every second. Then why stay? Because if I go back now, I'm still the guy who can't hold a job. The guy who's one bad month away from losing his kid to the system. He paused. But if I finish this, maybe I'm someone different. You're already someone different, Lila said softly. You just don't see it yet. Their eyes met, and the air between them shifted. Ethan looked away first, clearing his throat. What about you? He asked. Why not just sell? Take whatever you can get and start over somewhere easier? Because this is all I have left of him. My father poured everything into this place. His sweat, his blood, his whole life. If I lose it, it's like losing him all over again. She pulled her knees to her chest, and I'm not ready for that. Ethan understood. Some things you held on to not because they made sense, but because letting go would break you. We'll save it, he said with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. I promise. Lila didn't respond. But when she stood to go inside, she rested her hand briefly on his shoulder, a gesture so small and fleeting that he almost thought he'd imagined it. Tup. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Ethan was under the combine, replacing a belt that had snapped, when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He rolled out just in time to see a black sedan pull up to the house. A man in a suit stepped out, tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard that screamed bureaucracy. Lila came out of the house, wiping her hands on a towel. Her expression went cold the moment she saw him. Mr. Brennan, she said flatly, you're early. Miss Hart. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just doing a preliminary inspection before the official review. I hope that's not a problem. It's my property. You can't just show up unannounced. Actually, per the terms of your loan modification, I can. He tapped his clipboard. Shall we begin? Ethan stood slowly, grease-stained and wary. Brennan's gaze flicked to him, dismissive and sharp. And who's this? Ethan Cole, Lila said quickly. He's my maintenance contractor. Contractor? Brennan's tone made it clear he didn't believe her. Interesting. I wasn't aware you had the capital to hire outside help. He's working in exchange for room and board. Perfectly legal. Brennan made a note. We'll see. For the next 2 hours, he combed through every inch of the property, documenting every crack, every broken hinge, every patch of rust. Ethan and Lila followed at a distance, watching him tear apart their progress with cold, clinical efficiency. When he finally left, Lila sank onto the porch steps, head in her hands. "He's going to shut me down," she said, voice hollow. I saw it in his eyes. He's already decided. "No." Ethan sat beside her. "He's looking for a reason. That means we don't give him one." "Ethan, you saw what he wrote. He found problems we haven't even fixed yet. Then we fix them, all of them. We've got 3 weeks." 3 weeks isn't enough. "It has to be." Lila looked at him, desperate and exhausted. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not, but I owe myself something, and so do you." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay, we fight. We fight," Ethan agreed. And as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the failing farm, neither of them noticed the second car parked on the hill a quarter-mile away, or the man inside it watching through binoculars with a cruel smile on his face. The man's name was Dale Carver, and he'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years. He owned the land to the east, twice the size of Lila's farm, and 3 times as profitable. He'd offered to buy her out a dozen times, always with a smile that didn't hide his contempt. When she refused, he'd started playing a different game. Delayed shipments, equipment failures that seemed like bad luck, quiet words to the bank about risk and liability. Now, with Brennan's inspection looming, he had one final move to make. He picked up his phone and dialed. "It's me," he said when the line connected. "We need to move up the timeline. She's got someone helping her now, some drifter fixing her equipment. If we wait too long, she might actually pull this off." The voice on the other end was calm, businesslike. "What do you need?" "Make it look like an accident. Equipment malfunction, storm damage. I don't care. Just make sure that farm is worthless by the time the bank shows up." "Understood." Dale hung up and leaned back in his seat, watching the tiny figures move around the distant farmhouse. He'd waited long enough. One way or another, that land would be his. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the shift in the weather, the way the air turned heavy and electric. He looked up from the fence post he was setting and saw the sky to the west turning black, clouds churning like something alive. "Lila!" he shouted. She came running from the barn, saw the storm, and her face went pale. "We need to secure everything, now!" They worked frantically, moving tools into the barn, lashing down tarps, closing every door and window they could reach. The wind picked up, howling through the fields and bending the crops nearly flat. Thunder rolled across the valley like the voice of something ancient and angry. "The tractor!" Lila yelled over the wind. "It's still in the north field." "Leave it!" "I can't. If it floods, it's not worth your life." But she was already running, sprinting across the field toward the machine. Ethan cursed and took off after her, his boots pounding the dirt as the first raindrops began to fall, fat, heavy, and cold. Lila reached the tractor and hauled herself into the seat, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then roared to life. She threw it into gear and started driving back toward the barn, but the rain was coming harder now, turning the field into a mud pit. The tractor's wheels spun, losing traction. Lila gunned the engine, but instead of moving forward, the machine started to slide sideways, tilting dangerously toward the irrigation ditch. "Lila, stop!" Ethan screamed. She tried to correct, but it was too late. The tractor tipped and Lila jumped clear just as it slammed into the ditch with a sickening crunch of metal. She hit the ground hard, gasping, and when she tried to stand, her ankle buckled beneath her. Ethan reached her a second later, hauling her up and pulling her arm over his shoulders. "Can you walk?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Move." They staggered through the storm together, every step a battle against the wind and rain. By the time they reached the barn, they were both soaked to the bone and shaking. Ethan kicked the door shut behind them, and the sudden silence was deafening. Lila collapsed onto a hay bale, clutching her ankle. "The tractor is still there. We'll deal with it tomorrow." "I can't lose it, Ethan. I can't." "You won't." He knelt in front of her, his hand steadying her shaking shoulders. "You won't. I promise." She looked up at him, and in that moment, something broke open between them. All the walls they'd been building, all the careful distance they'd maintained, it shattered. Lila reached up and pulled him close, and Ethan didn't resist. They held each other in the dark barn while the storm raged outside, two broken people finding something solid in each other's arms. When they finally pulled apart, neither of them spoke. Words would have ruined it, but as they sat together in the fading light, listening to the rain hammer the roof, they both knew that everything had changed. And somewhere out in the storm, the tractor lay on its side in the ditch, damaged, but not by the weather alone. Because carved into the underside of the fuel tank, hidden where no one would see it, was a clean, deliberate cut that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The storm passed by morning, leaving the farm looking like a battlefield. Ethan woke before dawn to survey the damage, his body aching from the night before. Branches littered the yard, shingles had been torn from the barn roof, and the north field was a swamp of standing water and mud. But it was the tractor that made his stomach drop. He walked out to the irrigation ditch where it lay on its side, half submerged in muddy water. The machine looked worse in daylight. Bent metal, shattered glass, hydraulic fluid leaking into the soil like blood. He climbed down into the ditch, boots sinking into the muck, and started his inspection. That's when he saw it. The fuel line had been severed clean, but it wasn't torn or cracked from the impact. The cut was too precise, too deliberate. Ethan ran his fingers along the edge, his jaw tightening. Someone had done this on purpose. How bad is it? He turned to find Lila limping toward him, her ankle wrapped in an old bandage. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. You shouldn't be walking on that, he said. Answer the question. Ethan climbed out of the ditch, wiping his hands on his jeans. He could have lied, should have, probably, but she deserved the truth. It's sabotage, he said flatly. Lila went very still. What? Someone cut the fuel line before the storm. He showed her the evidence, the clean slice that no accident could have made. This was deliberate. Her face drained of color. Who would? I don't know, but whoever it was, they wanted that tractor destroyed. Lila stared at the ruined machine, her hands trembling. For a moment, Ethan thought she might break down completely, but instead, something harder settled into her expression, something that looked like rage. Dale Carver, she said quietly. Who? My neighbor. He owns the land to the east. He's been trying to buy me out for years, and when I wouldn't sell, things started going wrong. Equipment failures, delayed deliveries. Nothing I could prove, but too much to be coincidence. Ethan looked toward the eastern horizon, where he could just make out the outline of another farmhouse in the distance. You think he'd go this far? I think he'd do anything to get what he wants. Then we need to prove it. With what? A cut fuel line? That's not enough. He'll just say it was storm damage or my own negligence. She turned away, limping back toward the house. It doesn't matter anyway. The tractor's destroyed. I can't afford to replace it. The bank inspection's in 2 weeks, and I've got nothing to show them except a farm that's falling apart faster than I can fix it. Ethan watched her go, feeling the weight of her defeat settle over him like a blanket. He'd made her a promise last night that they'd save this place. But promises didn't mean much when you were fighting an enemy you couldn't see. He looked back at the tractor, then toward Carver's land, and made a decision. If someone wanted to play dirty, he could play dirty too. Lila spent the morning on the phone with the insurance company, her voice growing more strained with each transfer to another department. Ethan could hear her through the kitchen window as he worked on salvaging what he could from the storm damage. I understand that, but this isn't normal wear and tear, she was saying, her patience clearly running out. The machine was sabotaged. A pause. Yes, I know how that sounds, but I need someone to come out here and look at it. Another pause, longer this time. Fine. Yes, I'll wait for the adjuster. She hung up hard enough that Ethan heard the crack of plastic against wood. He found her standing in the kitchen, staring at the stack of bills on the counter. Her hands were clenched into fists, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They're going to call it an accident, or worse, they'll say I didn't maintain it properly. Either way, I won't see a dime. Maybe not from insurance, Ethan said carefully, but there are other ways to fix this. Like what? I'm out of options, Ethan. I've got 12 days until the bank inspection, a destroyed tractor, and a neighbor who apparently wants to bury me. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were red-rimmed. I think I'm done. You're not done. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because you're still standing here. You're still fighting. He moved closer, his voice steady. And because I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out. Lila shook her head slowly. Why? What's in this for you? I told you. I need to be someone my son can be proud of. And I can't do that if I walk away the first time things get hard. This isn't hard, Ethan. This is impossible. Then we do the impossible. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, despite everything, she laughed, a short, bitter sound that was more exhaustion than humor. You're insane, she said. Probably, but I've got a plan. What kind of plan? The kind where we stop playing defense and start fighting back. That afternoon, Ethan drove Lila's old truck into town. The vehicle barely made it, coughing black smoke and threatening to stall at every stoplight, but it got him where he needed to go. Ridgemont was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Main Street had a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and not much else. Ethan parked in front of the hardware store and went inside, the bell above the door jingling as he entered. An older man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper. Help you? I need parts for a John Deere 4450, Ethan said. Fuel injection system, hydraulic lines, anything you've got. The man whistled low. That's an expensive repair. You got the cash? Working on it, but I'll take whatever you can spare on credit. Don't do credit for strangers. I'm not a stranger. I'm working for Lila Hart. The man's expression shifted, something between sympathy and resignation. That girl's had a rough go of it. Her father was a good man. Shame what happened to him. Yeah, shame. Ethan leaned against the counter. You know Dale Carver? The man's eyes narrowed. Everyone knows Dale. Why? Just curious. He ever give Lila any trouble? Depends on what you call trouble. He's been after that land since her father died, but he's always kept things legal. Barely. The man studied Ethan carefully. You asking for a reason? Just trying to understand the situation. Well, here's some free advice. Dale Carver's got money, connections, and a mean streak when he doesn't get his way. If you're planning on getting in his business, you better be ready for a fight. Good thing I like fighting. The man almost smiled. I'll see what I can do about those parts, but it'll take a few days to get them in. I'll take whatever you've got now, and I'll come back for the rest. Ethan left the store with a box of spare belts and filters. Not nearly enough to fix the tractor, but better than nothing. As he loaded them into the truck, he noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The driver was watching him through tinted windows, and when Ethan stared back, the car pulled away slowly, deliberately. Message received. When he got back to the farm, he found Lila in the barn, trying to work despite her injured ankle. She was attempting to lift a heavy toolbox, her face twisted in pain. Stop, Ethan said, crossing the space in 3 strides. He took the box from her hands and set it down. You're going to make it worse. I can't just sit around doing nothing. You're not doing nothing. You're healing. He guided her to a chair, and she sat with a frustrated huff. Besides, I need you sharp for what comes next. What comes next? We're going to pay Dale Carver a visit. Lila's eyes widened. Are you serious? Completely. If he's the one sabotaging you, I want to look him in the eye and see if he flinches. And if he doesn't? Then we keep digging until we find proof. Ethan, that's insane. He's not just going to admit, I know, but sometimes you learn more from what people don't say. He crouched in front of her, his expression serious. I'm not going to let him destroy you, not without a fight. Lila searched his face, and something in her expression softened. You really mean that? Every word. She reached out and took his hand, just for a moment, just long enough to anchor herself. Okay, we'll go tomorrow. We'll go together, Ethan said, and we'll make damn sure he knows we're not backing down. That evening, Ethan called Lucas. His sister put the boy on the line, and the sound of his son's voice hit him like a physical blow. Dad, when are you coming home? Soon, buddy, I promise. You said that last week. I know, but I'm working on something important, something that's going to help us. Aunt Rebecca says you're fixing a farm. That's right. It's hard work, but it's good work. There was a pause, and Ethan could hear the doubt in his son's silence. Do you like it there better than here? The question broke something inside him. No, Lucas, I don't like anywhere better than being with you. But sometimes you have to do hard things so you can do better things later. You understand? I guess. I'll be home before you know it, and when I get there, we're going to do something special. Just you and me. Deal? Deal? Lucas hesitated. I miss you, Dad. I miss you too, kiddo. More than you know. When the call ended, Ethan sat on the porch steps, staring out at the dark fields. He thought about all the promises he'd made and broken over the years. All the times he'd said soon and meant maybe never. But this time felt different. This time, he had something to prove, not just to Lucas, but to himself. Lila came out and sat beside him, 2 mugs of coffee in her hands. She passed one to him without a word, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. You're a good father, she said finally. I'm trying to be. That's all anyone can do. Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd let a stranger into her life when she had every reason not to. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For giving me a reason to keep trying. Lila didn't respond right away. She just sipped her coffee and stared out at the land she was fighting so hard to keep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I used to think I had to do everything alone, that asking for help was the same as admitting I'd failed. She paused. But you've shown me that maybe strength isn't about doing it all yourself. Maybe it's about knowing when to let someone stand beside you. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. He wanted to say something, to tell her what she was starting to mean to him, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, he just sat there beside her, their shoulders barely touching, and let the silence say what he couldn't. No. The next morning, they drove to Dale Carver's farm. The place was everything Lila's wasn't. Pristine fences, new equipment, fields that looked like they'd been manicured by a professional landscaping crew. The farmhouse was a sprawling 2-story building with fresh paint and a wraparound porch that screamed money. Ethan parked the truck in the driveway, and they both climbed out. Lila moved stiffly, her ankle still bothering her, but she refused to show weakness. A man stepped out onto the porch before they reached the front door. Dale Carver was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He wore expensive boots and a flannel shirt that probably cost more than everything Ethan owned. Lila, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. What a pleasant surprise. And who's your friend? Ethan Cole, Ethan said, not offering his hand. Ah, the handyman I've been hearing about. Dale's smile widened. Word travels fast in a small town. I hear you've been making quite the effort over at Lila's place. Someone has to, Ethan said flatly. Dale chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Well, I admire your optimism, though I'm not sure how much good it'll do. Some things are just too far gone to save. We'll see, Lila said, her voice tight. We're here because my tractor was damaged in the storm. Someone cut the fuel line before it went into the ditch. Dale's expression didn't change. That's terrible. You should report it to the sheriff. I'm reporting it to you. Me? He pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense. Why would I know anything about it? Because you've been trying to run me off my land for 3 years, and now, right before the bank inspection, my equipment gets sabotaged. She took a step closer. Seems like quite the coincidence. Dale's smile finally faded. Careful, Lila. Accusations like that can get you in trouble, especially when you've got no proof. I've got enough. No, you don't. You've got a cut fuel line and a grudge. That's not evidence. That's desperation. He looked at Ethan. And bringing muscle along won't change that. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not muscle. I'm a mechanic. And mechanics know how to spot sloppy work. Whoever cut that line wasn't as careful as they thought. For the first time, something flickered in Dale's eyes. Just for a second, but Ethan caught it. I don't know what you're talking about, Dale said, his tone colder now. But if you're accusing me of a crime, I suggest you get a lawyer. Otherwise, get off my property. We're leaving, Lila said, turning away. But this isn't over. Yes, it is, Dale called after them. Your farm's done, Lila. You just don't want to admit it yet. But when the bank takes it, I'll be right there with a fair offer. And you'll take it because you'll have no other choice. Ethan had to physically stop himself from going back and decking the man. Lila grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the truck. Don't, she whispered. He's not worth it. They drove back in silence, the weight of Dale's words hanging between them. When they finally reached Lila's farm, she sat in the truck for a long moment, staring at the broken tractor in the distance. "He's right," she said quietly. "I don't have proof. And without it, I'm just making noise." "Then we get proof." "How?" Ethan turned to her, his expression hard. "We set a trap." Over the next 3 days, they worked around the clock. Ethan installed motion sensor cameras around the property, hidden in places where they'd catch anyone approaching the equipment. He reinforced the barn's locks and set up tripwires that would trigger lights if someone tried to sneak in after dark. Lila watched him work, equal parts impressed and worried. "You really think he'll come back?" "If he's desperate enough, yeah. And if he does, we'll have him on camera. And if he doesn't, then we keep fixing this place until the bank has no choice but to approve you." They fell into a rhythm, working until exhaustion forced them to stop, then starting again at dawn. Ethan taught Lila how to read hydraulic schematics and diagnose engine problems. She taught him the ins and outs of soil management and crop rotation. Slowly, the farm started to look less like a disaster zone and more like something worth saving. But the clock was ticking. 1 week until the inspection. 1 week to turn everything around. On the 5th night, Ethan woke to the sound of his phone buzzing. He grabbed it, groggy and disoriented, and saw Lila's name on the screen. "What's wrong?" he answered. "Someone's here," she whispered. "I heard a truck. Eastfield." Ethan was on his feet immediately, pulling on his boots. "Stay inside, lock the doors." "Ethan, I mean it. Stay inside." He grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the darkness, his heart pounding. The night was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the distant rumble of an engine. He moved toward the east field, keeping low, and that's when he saw it. A truck parked near the irrigation lines, headlights off. A figure crouched beside one of the main valves, doing something with a wrench. Ethan didn't think. He just ran. The figure saw him coming and bolted, sprinting toward the truck. Ethan chased, his boots pounding the dirt, but the man was faster. He reached the truck, threw it into gear, and tore off into the night, leaving Ethan standing in a cloud of dust. But Ethan had seen enough. The truck had Dale Carver's logo on the side. He pulled out his phone and checked the camera feed. The motion sensors had caught everything: the truck's arrival, the man's face in the beam of his flashlight, the deliberate tampering with the irrigation valve. They had him. The next morning, Ethan showed Lila the footage. She watched in silence, her expression unreadable, as the video played out exactly as he'd described. "That's Ray Miller," she said finally, "one of Dale's farmhands. Can you identify him for sure?" "Absolutely. I've seen him a dozen times." She looked at Ethan. "This is it. This is what we need. We take it to the sheriff, file a report, get Dale on record. And then what? Then we make sure the bank knows exactly what you've been up against. That you've been fighting sabotage, not incompetence." Lila nodded slowly, and for the first time in days, Ethan saw something like hope in her eyes. But that hope was short-lived, because when they went to check the irrigation valve the saboteur had been tampering with, they found something worse than a cut line. He'd opened the valve completely, flooding the east field and destroying 2 weeks' worth of crops in a single night. Lila stood at the edge of the flooded field, water lapping at her boots, and finally broke. She didn't cry. She just sank to her knees in the mud, her hands covering her face, and made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "We'll fix it. We'll fix all of it." "There's nothing left to fix," she whispered. "He's won." "No, he hasn't. Not yet." But as he held her there in the ruined field, watching the water drain away everything she'd worked for, even Ethan wasn't sure he believed it anymore. They sat in the mud for a long time, neither of them speaking. The water continued to drain slowly into the lower fields, carrying away topsoil and the last remnants of Lila's hope. Ethan kept his arm around her shoulders, feeling the tremors that ran through her body, and realized that this moment was different from all the other setbacks. This wasn't just another problem to solve. This was the breaking point. When Lila finally stood, her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes had gone hard. "Take me to town," she said. "I want to file that report now." The drive to the sheriff's office was tense and silent. Ethan kept glancing at Lila, worried about the rigid set of her jaw, the way her hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She looked like someone who'd been pushed past fear into something colder and more dangerous. The sheriff's office was a small brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between the post office and a closed-down barber shop. Inside, a deputy sat behind a desk, working on paperwork with the kind of bored efficiency that came from years of nothing happening. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "We need to file a report," Lila said. "Property damage and trespassing." The deputy finally looked up, and recognition flickered across his face. "Miss Hart, what happened?" "Someone sabotaged my irrigation system last night, flooded my east field and destroyed my crops. I have video evidence." That got his attention. He pulled out a form and a pen. "Let's see what you've got." Ethan pulled out his phone and showed him the footage. The deputy watched carefully, his expression neutral, as Ray Miller's face appeared clearly in the camera's night vision, tampering with the valve before running when Ethan approached. "That's Ray Miller," the deputy said. "Works for Dale Carver." "I know who he works for," Lila said sharply. "That's why we're here. This is the second incident in a week. Someone cut my tractor's fuel line right before the storm, and now this. Dale Carver's been trying to force me off my land for years, and now he's escalating." The deputy set down his pen slowly. "Miss Hart, that's a serious accusation. I have evidence. You have footage of Ray Miller, who's probably going to say he was checking your irrigation system as a favor, or that he was lost, or any number of things that aren't sabotage." He leaned back in his chair. "Unless you've got Ray on tape saying Dale told him to do it, this is just going to be your word against theirs." "So you're not going to do anything?" Ethan cut in. "I didn't say that. I'll file the report, and I'll have a talk with Ray. But realistically, without direct evidence connecting Dale Carver to this, there's not much I can do." The deputy looked at Lila with something that might have been sympathy. "I know you're in a tough spot, but you need more than this." Lila stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "Fine, I'll get you more." "Miss Hart," but she was already walking out, and Ethan had to hurry to catch up. He found her standing beside the truck, breathing hard, her hands shaking with barely controlled rage. "He's right," she said before Ethan could speak. "It's not enough. We need Ray to talk, or we need to catch Dale himself, or we need something that proves he's behind all of this." "Then we get it." "How?" She turned to him, desperate. "We've got 5 days until the inspection, a flooded field, a destroyed tractor, and a neighbor who's apparently untouchable. How are we supposed to fight that?" Ethan thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "Give me a minute." He walked a few steps away and dialed a number he hadn't called in over a year. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Marcus Chen." "Marcus, it's Ethan Cole." There was a pause, then a surprised laugh. "Cole? Man, I thought you fell off the planet. Where the hell have you been?" "Long story. Listen, I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind where you use that investigative reporting degree you're always bragging about and help me take down someone who deserves it." Marcus was quiet for a beat. "I'm listening." Ethan explained the situation quickly. Lila's farm, Dale Carver's harassment, the sabotage, the lack of concrete evidence. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when Ethan finished, he could almost hear the wheels turning in his old friend's head. "So you need someone to dig into Carver's background," Marcus said. "See if there's a pattern of this kind of behavior." "Exactly. If he's done this before, there'll be records, complaints, something we can use. And you think I can find it?" "I know you can. You found that corruption story in the city council when everyone said it was impossible." Marcus laughed. "That was different. That was my job. This is asking me to work for free on something that's probably going to get me nowhere." "I wouldn't ask if I had another option." There was a long silence. Then Marcus sighed. "You owe me. Big time. Put it on my tab." "Your tab's already too long to pay off, but send me everything you've got, names, dates, incidents. I'll start digging tonight." Ethan felt a rush of relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If there's nothing to find, we're both screwed." When Ethan hung up and turned back to Lila, she was watching him with cautious hope. "What was that about?" "Insurance policy. A friend who's very good at finding dirt on people who think they're untouchable." He walked back to her. It's a long shot, but it's better than nothing. How long will it take? A day, maybe two. Which means we keep working. We show the bank that you've been fighting against sabotage, not incompetence. We document everything. And we make damn sure that when they show up, they see a farm that's worth saving. Lila looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something that surprised him. She reached up and kissed him, quick and fierce and desperate, like she was trying to convince herself that hope was still possible. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up that day. Probably the same thing you're doing now, fighting. Maybe, but I wouldn't have made it this far. She took his hand. Whatever happens, thank you for not giving up on this place, on me. Ethan wanted to tell her that he wasn't capable of giving up on her anymore, that somewhere in the past few weeks she'd become more important than he'd planned on. But the words stuck in his throat, so he just squeezed her hand and nodded. They drove back to the farm in silence, but this time it felt different. Less like defeat and more like the quiet before a storm. The kind of quiet where you knew something was about to break. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in the barn on a makeshift cot, staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios in his head. Even if Marcus found something, there was no guarantee it would be enough. And even if the bank approved Lila's loan extension, Dale wasn't going to stop. Men like him never did. Around midnight, he heard footsteps outside. He sat up, reaching for the flashlight he kept beside the cot, but then he recognized Lila's silhouette in the doorway. Can't sleep either? She asked quietly. Not really. She came inside and sat down on an overturned crate, wrapping her arms around herself. She was wearing an old sweatshirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. In the dim light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. I keep thinking about my father, she said after a moment, about how hard he worked to build this place, how proud he was of it. She paused. And how disappointed he'd be if he could see me now, about to lose it all. He wouldn't be disappointed. He'd be proud that you fought. Fighting doesn't mean much if you lose. It means everything. Ethan stood and moved closer to her. You think your father never had moments like this, where everything felt impossible? But he kept going, and you're doing the same thing. I'm tired, Ethan. I'm so tired of fighting alone. You're not alone. Not anymore. Lila looked up at him, and in that moment something shifted between them. All the tension of the past weeks, all the fear and desperation and unspoken feelings came rushing to the surface. I'm scared, she whispered, not of losing the farm, of losing you. When this is over, you're going back to your son, back to your life, and I'll be here again, alone. Ethan knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. What if I don't want to go back? What if there's a way to make this work? How? Your son needs you. I know, but maybe there's a way for him to need both of us, for this place to be home for all of us. He hesitated, then pushed forward. I'm not saying it would be easy, but I've spent the last year running from everything that scared me, and for the first time in a long time, I want to stop running. I want to stay. Lila's breath caught. You mean that? Every word. She pulled him closer, and this time when they kissed, it wasn't desperate or fleeting. It was a promise, a commitment to something neither of them had planned on, but both of them needed. When they finally pulled apart, Lila rested her forehead against his. We have to save this place first. We will. And if we don't, then we'll figure out what comes next, together. They stayed like that for a while, holding on to each other in the darkness. Two broken people finding something whole in the wreckage. The next 3 days were a blur of frantic activity. Ethan worked from dawn until well past midnight, repairing what could be salvaged and documenting what couldn't. He took photographs of the sabotaged equipment, wrote detailed reports of each incident, and organized everything into a presentation that would make it impossible for the bank to ignore what Lila had been fighting against. Lila worked alongside him, her ankle still bothering her, but her determination unshakable. She met with the insurance adjuster, who confirmed that the tractor damage was suspicious but stopped short of calling it deliberate. She contacted agricultural experts, who testified that her soil quality was excellent despite the recent flooding. She compiled financial records showing that every setback could be traced to external interference, not mismanagement. And through it all, they waited for Marcus to call. The call came on the fourth day. Ethan answered on the first ring. "Tell me you found something." "Oh, I found something," Marcus said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "Dale Carver's been playing this game for 20 years. I found 3 other farms in the county that he acquired under similar circumstances. Equipment failures, mysterious accidents, financial pressure right before critical inspections. 2 of the previous owners filed complaints, but nothing stuck because they couldn't prove direct involvement. So he's done this before, multiple times. And here's the kicker. One of the farmhands who used to work for him, a guy named Tom Brennan, quit 6 months ago and filed a whistleblower complaint. Said Dale was running an organized operation to force small farms out so he could buy the land cheap." Ethan's pulse quickened. "Where's this complaint now?" "Buried in county records. It never went anywhere because Brennan didn't have hard evidence, just testimony. But combined with your video footage and the pattern of behavior, it paints a pretty damning picture." "Can you send me everything?" "Already in your email. But Ethan, you need to be careful. If Dale finds out you're digging into this, things could get ugly." "They're already ugly." "Then watch your back. Guys like him don't take kindly to being exposed." After hanging up, Ethan immediately forwarded the information to Lila. When she read through Marcus's findings, her expression went from disbelief to fury to something like vindication. "This is it," she said. "This is what we need. We take it to the bank. Show them that you've been systematically targeted, that every problem you've had can be traced back to Carver's interference. And we take it to the sheriff. Make him reopen the investigation. Exactly. We hit Carver from every angle until he has nowhere to hide." For the first time in weeks, Lila smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "We might actually pull this off. We will pull this off." But even as he said it, Ethan felt a nagging sense of unease. Men like Dale Carver didn't go down without a fight, and they were about to back him into a corner. The bank inspection was scheduled for the next morning at 9. Ethan and Lila spent the evening making final preparations, walking through every inch of the property to make sure nothing had been overlooked. The farm looked better than it had in years. Equipment organized, fields cleared of debris, safety systems reinforced. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to show that Lila was serious about saving this place. Around 8 that evening, Ethan noticed dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. The air had that heavy electric feel that came before a big storm. "We're going to get hit again," Lila said, following his gaze. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Weather Service is calling for severe thunderstorms, possible hail." She bit her lip. "We should secure everything we can." They worked quickly, moving tools inside, covering equipment with tarps, checking that all the barn doors were properly latched. But the storm came faster than expected, rolling in with a wall of wind that bent the trees nearly horizontal. "Inside!" Ethan shouted over the rising roar. They made it to the house just as the first drops began to fall, huge, heavy raindrops that hit like bullets. Within seconds, it became a deluge, sheets of water so thick that Ethan could barely see the barn from the kitchen window. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it rattled the windows. Lightning flickered constantly, turning the world into a strobe-lit nightmare. And through it all, the wind screamed like something alive and furious. "The tractor," Lila said suddenly, "the one we got working yesterday. It's still in the north field. Leave it. It's not worth—" "We can't afford to lose another one. That's the only machine we have left that can handle the heavy work." "Lila, it's too dangerous." "I'm not asking you to come with me, but I have to try." Before he could stop her, she was out the door and running into the storm. Ethan cursed and went after her, his boots splashing through water that was already ankle deep. The rain lashed at his face, making it almost impossible to see. Lightning forked across the sky, close enough that he felt the static electricity raise the hair on his arms. He caught up to Lila halfway to the field. "You're insane." "I know," she shouted back, but she didn't stop. They reached the tractor together, both of them soaked to the bone. Lila climbed into the seat and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. She threw it into gear and started driving toward the barn, but the ground was already turning to mud, and the wheels struggled for traction. "It's not going to make it," Ethan yelled. "Yes, it will." But as she said it, the tractor lurched violently to the side. The front wheel had dropped into a washout, hidden under the rushing water, and suddenly the whole machine was tipping. Jump! Ethan screamed. Lila tried to pull herself free, but her foot caught on the pedal. The tractor continued to tip, metal groaning, and Ethan saw exactly what was about to happen. He didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed Lila around the waist and yanked her backward with all his strength. Her foot came free, and they both fell hard into the mud as the tractor slammed onto its side with a crash that was somehow audible even over the storm. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just lay there in the mud and rain, gasping for air, while the storm raged around them. Then Lila started laughing, a wild, half-hysterical sound that was more relief than humor. "You saved my life." "You're welcome," Ethan managed. "Now can we please get inside before we both drown?" They staggered back to the house, supporting each other, and collapsed on the kitchen floor in a heap. Water pooled around them, and somewhere outside something metal crashed to the ground. Lila turned her head to look at him, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes bright with something that looked like joy despite everything. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "That was our last working tractor." And then they were both laughing, because what else could they do? They just lost everything, again, and the bank inspection was in 12 hours, and they were lying on the floor soaking wet like a couple of idiots. But they were alive, and they were together. And somehow, that felt like enough. The storm passed around midnight, leaving the farm looking like a war zone. In the morning light, the damage was worse than Ethan had feared. The tractor was destroyed beyond repair, the north field was completely flooded, and part of the barn's roof had been torn away. Lila stood in the middle of it all, surveying the wreckage with a blank expression. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just stood there, taking it in. "The inspection's in 2 hours," she said quietly. "I know." "There's no way they're going to approve the loan. Not after this." Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. No bank in their right mind would look at this disaster and see a viable investment. "We still have the evidence against Carver," he said. "We can show them. It won't matter. They don't care about why we're failing. They only care that we are failing." Before Ethan could respond, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching. 2 cars pulled into the driveway, one marked with the bank's logo, the other unmarked but official-looking. A man in a suit stepped out of the first car, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of professional neutrality. Behind him came another man, older, with a sheriff's badge clipped to his belt. "Miss Hart?" the banker said. "I'm Richard Torres from First National. We're here for your inspection." Lila straightened her shoulders, and Ethan saw her armor go up, the same careful composure she'd worn the first day he met her. "Of course. Let me show you around." The next hour was brutal. Torres walked the property with a clipboard documenting every broken fence, every piece of damaged equipment, every sign of struggle. The sheriff, who'd introduced himself as Sheriff Carson, asked questions about the storm damage and took notes. When they reached the overturned tractor, Torres just shook his head. "Miss Hart, I'm sorry, but this is beyond what we can reasonably support. The level of risk here—" "It's not risk," Ethan interrupted. "It's sabotage." Torres turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "This farm hasn't been failing because of mismanagement or bad luck. It's been systematically targeted by a neighbor who wants to force Miss Hart off her land so he can buy it cheap." He pulled out his phone. "And we have proof." For the next 20 minutes, Ethan laid it all out. The video footage of Ray Miller, the pattern of incidents, Marcus's research into Dale Carver's history, the testimony from former employees. He showed them photographs of the cut fuel line, the sabotaged irrigation valve, the timeline that made it impossible to see these as isolated accidents. Sheriff Carson listened with increasing interest. Torres remained skeptical but paid attention. "This is substantial," Carson said finally. "If even half of this holds up, we're looking at criminal interference, possibly racketeering." "But it doesn't change the current state of the property," Torres said. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, Miss Hart, but my job is to assess financial viability. And right now, she's a victim of a crime that your bank should have been protecting her from," Ethan cut in. "Every loan officer in this county knows Dale Carver's reputation. You know what he does, but it's easier to let small farms fail than to actually investigate why." Torres's expression hardened. "Mr. Cole, I understand you're upset, but accusations like that aren't accusations, they're facts. And if First National forecloses on this property while knowing that it was deliberately sabotaged, you're complicit." Ethan, Lila said quietly, putting a hand on his arm. But there was gratitude in her eyes. Sheriff Carson cleared his throat. I'm going to need copies of all this evidence, and I'll be paying Dale Carver a visit this afternoon. He looked at Lila. Miss Hart, I can't promise anything, but if what you're saying is true, we'll pursue it. Torres closed his briefcase with a sharp click. I'll need to discuss this with my supervisors. In light of these allegations, we may be able to grant a temporary extension pending the outcome of the investigation. He paused. But I can't make any guarantees. After they left, Lila and Ethan stood in the driveway, exhausted and uncertain. What just happened? Lila asked. I think we bought ourselves some time. Maybe. And if they don't believe us? Ethan took her hand. Then we keep fighting, but I don't think we're alone anymore. As if on cue, his phone rang. It was Marcus. Turn on the news, Marcus said without preamble. Local station, now. Ethan pulled up the news app on his phone, and what he saw made his heart stop. The headline read, Local landowner under investigation for property fraud. And below it was a photograph of Dale Carver being led out of his house in handcuffs. Lila grabbed the phone from Ethan's hand, her eyes scanning the screen in disbelief. The article detailed how Sheriff Carson had executed a search warrant on Dale Carver's property that morning, uncovering documents that proved a systematic pattern of property manipulation spanning 2 decades. Financial records showed payments to contractors for deliberate equipment sabotage. Email correspondence outlined strategies for forcing neighboring farms into foreclosure. And most damning of all, there were recorded conversations between Dale and his attorney discussing how to acquire Lila's land once the bank took possession. Ray Miller turned on him, Lila read aloud, her voice shaking. He gave a full confession in exchange for immunity. Said Dale had been paying him to cause problems on my farm for over a year. Ethan felt a surge of vindication so strong it was almost painful. We did it. We actually did it. But Lila's expression remained tense. This doesn't fix the farm. The damage is still here, the equipment's still destroyed, and the bank hasn't approved anything yet. She was right, and Ethan knew it. Exposing Dale was justice, but justice didn't rebuild tractors or restore flooded fields. They still had a mountain to climb, and the clock was still ticking. His phone rang again. This time it was Torres from the bank. Mr. Cole, I'm calling with an update. In light of this morning's developments, First National has agreed to grant Miss Hart a 6-month extension on her loan with significantly reduced interest rates. We'll also be providing access to an agricultural disaster relief fund to help with equipment replacement. Ethan's throat tightened. You're serious? Completely. What happened to Miss Hart was unconscionable, and the bank recognizes that we should have investigated these claims more thoroughly when they first arose. This extension should give her the time she needs to recover and demonstrate the farm's viability. Torres paused. Please tell Miss Hart we're sorry it took this long. When Ethan relayed the news, Lila's knees buckled. He caught her, and she clung to him, her whole body shaking with relief so profound it looked like pain. 6 months, she whispered. That's enough time. That's actually enough time. More than enough. We can rebuild everything. Do it right this time. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. You saved me. You saved everything. We saved each other. They stood there in the driveway, holding on to each other while the morning sun broke through the last of the storm clouds. And for the first time since her father died, Lila felt like she could breathe. The next week was chaos of a different kind. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Lila's farm became a symbol of something bigger, the little guy fighting back against corruption and winning. Reporters showed up wanting interviews. Neighbors who'd been too scared to speak out about Dale's tactics came forward with their own stories. The district attorney announced a full investigation into Dale's business practices, and 3 other families filed civil suits for damages. Through it all, Ethan and Lila kept working. The relief fund provided enough money to rent equipment while they waited for insurance settlements, and volunteers from town started showing up to help with repairs. The hardware store owner brought supplies at cost. The diner owner set up a food donation program. Even people who barely knew Lila appeared with tools and time, wanting to be part of something that felt like justice. Ethan found himself stepping into a role he'd never expected, coordinating volunteers, managing schedules, making decisions about how to allocate resources. And he was good at it. The same skills that made him a talented mechanic translated perfectly to organizing people and solving complex logistical problems. "You're a natural at this," Lila said one evening as they reviewed progress reports. "Have you ever thought about doing something like this full-time?" "Like what? Farm management?" "Leadership, organization. You're holding this whole operation together." Ethan looked around the barn where a dozen volunteers were working on various projects, all coordinated through systems he'd created. "I never saw myself as a leader. I was always just the guy who fixed things when they broke." "That's exactly what a leader does. They fix things. They see what's broken and figure out how to make it work." She touched his arm. "You've been doing that since the day you got here." The words settled into him, shifting something fundamental. For years, he'd defined himself by what he'd lost: his job, his marriage, his sense of purpose. But here, he was building something new. Not just fixing Lila's farm, but constructing a version of himself he could actually respect. That night, he called Lucas. His sister answered first, as usual, but her tone was different this time. "Ethan, we saw the news. What you did for that woman, it's all over the county. It wasn't just me. She did most of the fighting herself. That's not what the reporters are saying. They're calling you a hero." Rebecca paused. "Lucas is very proud of his dad right now." When Lucas got on the line, his voice was bright with excitement. "Dad, Mrs. Chen at school showed us the newspaper article. It had your picture and everything." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, buddy, it's been pretty crazy here." "Are you still coming home?" The question hit harder than it should have. Ethan glanced across the barn to where Lila was showing a volunteer how to properly torque a bolt, her face animated in a way he'd never seen before. He thought about the life he'd been building here, the purpose he'd found, the woman he'd fallen in love with without meaning to. "I'm coming home," he said carefully. "But I need to talk to you about something important. How would you feel about maybe living somewhere new, somewhere with a lot of land and animals and room to run around?" There was a pause. "Like a farm?" "Exactly like a farm." "Would you be there all the time, not traveling for work?" "I'd be there all the time, every single day." Another pause, longer this time. "Would Miss Lila be there too?" Ethan's heart stuttered. "How do you know about Lila?" "Aunt Rebecca told me. She said you've been helping her save her farm. Is she nice?" "She's very nice, and I think you'd really like her." "Then, okay, I want to live there." Lucas's voice got quieter. "I just want to be with you, Dad. I don't care where it is." After they hung up, Ethan sat in the darkness for a long time, turning the conversation over in his mind. He'd been so focused on saving the farm that he hadn't let himself think seriously about what came after. But Lucas's question had forced him to confront it. Did he want to stay here permanently? Build a life with Lila? Bring his son to this place and try to make it home for all of them? The answer terrified him because it was so clearly yes. 3 days later, Sheriff Carson came by with an update. He found Ethan and Lila in the equipment shed, working on restoring one of the older tractors that had survived the storms. "Got news you'll want to hear," Carson said, removing his hat. "Dale Carver just took a plea deal. He's pleading guilty to fraud, conspiracy to commit property damage, and about a dozen other charges. He'll do 5 years minimum, probably more, and he's agreed to pay restitution to everyone he targeted." Lila set down her wrench slowly. "Restitution?" "Full compensation for damages based on documented losses. For you, Miss Hart, that's going to be substantial, enough to replace your equipment and then some." "How much?" Carson consulted his notes. "Preliminary estimate is around $80,000. Could go higher depending on what the investigation uncovers." The number hung in the air like something unreal. Lila looked at Ethan, then back at the sheriff. "That's enough to modernize everything, buy new tractors, upgrade the irrigation system, maybe even expand the operation." "It's what you're owed," Carson said. "And between you and me, I'm glad we finally got him. Dale's been a problem in this county for too long." After Carson left, Lila walked out into the field and just stood there, looking at her land with new eyes. Ethan followed, giving her space but staying close enough to reach if she needed him. "I keep waiting to wake up," she said without turning around. "Like this is all some dream, and I'm going to open my eyes back in that kitchen, staring at foreclosure notices and trying to figure out which bills to pay first. It's real, all of it. My father would have loved this. seeing Dale finally face consequences, knowing the farm was going to survive. Her voice broke slightly. I wish he could have met you. Tell me about him. Lila was quiet for a moment, then started talking. She told him about a man who'd worked himself to the bone, trying to prove that small farms could still thrive in a world of corporate agriculture. About someone who'd believed that land wasn't just property, but a legacy, a responsibility to steward for future generations. About a father who'd taught her that dignity came from honest work, and that no amount of money was worth compromising your principles. He sounds like someone I would have respected, Ethan said when she finished. He would have liked you too. You're a lot like him, actually. Stubborn, principled, too proud to ask for help even when you need it. She smiled. He also had a talent for fixing impossible things. The farm wasn't impossible. It just needed someone to believe it could be saved. No, it needed you. Lila turned to face him fully. And I need you. Not just for the farm, but for everything. I know that's complicated because of Lucas, because of your life before this, but I need you to know that what we have here, it's real for me. It matters. Ethan closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands. It's real for me too. And I've been thinking about what comes next, about how to make this work long term. And I want to stay. Bring Lucas here. Build a life that includes both of you. He paused. If you'll have us. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd be willing to take a chance on a single father with no real plan and a 7-year-old kid who's probably going to drive you crazy. That depends. Is the single father willing to take a chance on a stubborn farmer who doesn't know when to quit and has way too much pride for her own good? Absolutely. She kissed him then, slow and deep, and it felt like a promise being sealed. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears. Your son's going to love it here, she said. There's so much space to explore, and I could teach him about the farm, about how things grow. He's going to love you, Ethan corrected. Because I do. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and unplanned. But the moment they were spoken, he knew they were true. Somewhere between fixing tractors and fighting sabotage, between storms and standoffs, he'd fallen completely in love with this woman. Lila stared at him, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked like wonder. You love me? I love you, he confirmed. I know it's fast and I know it's complicated, but I love you, and I think I have since you climbed down from that tractor and told me I was fixing it or sleeping in the dirt. She laughed, the sound bright and free. I love you too. And yes, it's fast, and yes, it's complicated, but I don't care. We'll figure it out. Together? Together. Quote. The following week, Ethan drove north to pick up Lucas. He'd prepared a whole speech about the farm, about Lila, about the new life they were going to build. But when his son came running out of Rebecca's house and threw himself into Ethan's arms, all the words disappeared. I missed you so much, Dad, Lucas said, his small arms wrapped tight around Ethan's neck. I missed you too, buddy. More than you know. Rebecca stood on the porch, watching them with a mixture of relief and sadness. Later, while Lucas was packing his things, she pulled Ethan aside. He's been different these past few weeks, she said. Happier, more settled. Whatever you've been doing out there, it's working. I found something worth fighting for. I can tell. I've never seen you like this, so sure of yourself. She smiled. It's good. You deserve it. Thank you for taking care of him. I know it wasn't easy. He's my nephew. It was never a question. She paused. But I'm glad he's going back to you. He needs his father, and from what I can tell, his father needs him too. The drive back to the farm took 3 hours. Lucas spent most of it pressed against the window, taking in the landscape with wide eyes. When they finally pulled into the driveway and he saw the field stretching toward the horizon, his face lit up. This is it? This is where we're going to live? If you like it. What do you think? Lucas scrambled out of the truck before it had fully stopped, running toward the barn where Lila was waiting. She'd been nervous all morning, changing her clothes 3 times and making Ethan promise that she looked presentable. Now, as she watched this small boy sprint toward her with unbridled enthusiasm, all that nervousness melted away. Are you Miss Lila? Lucas asked, skidding to a stop in front of her. I am. And you must be Lucas. Your dad's told me so much about you. He told me about you too. He said you fight bad guys and save farms. Lila laughed. Well, your dad did most of the saving. I mostly just tried not to give up. Lucas considered this seriously. Dad says not giving up is the most important thing. Your dad's a smart man. I know. Lucas looked around, taking in the barn, the fields, the equipment. Can I explore? Of course. Just stay where we can see you, okay? He took off running, his joy so pure and unfiltered that both Ethan and Lila felt their eyes sting watching him. He's perfect, Lila said softly. He's absolutely perfect. He's a good kid, and he's going to love it here. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. We all are. Over the next few days, they settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Lucas adapted to farm life with the resilience of childhood, turning everything into an adventure. He helped Lila feed the chickens they'd recently acquired, learned how to check irrigation lines, and followed Ethan around the equipment shed asking endless questions about how things worked. In the evenings, they'd eat dinner together at the kitchen table, the same table where Lila and Ethan had first shared a meal, back when they were strangers bound by necessity rather than love. Now it was home base for a makeshift family that was learning how to be whole. Dad, can we get a dog? Lucas asked one night over dinner. A farm dog would be useful, Lila said, clearly trying not to smile. They help keep predators away from the chickens. Ethan looked between them, seeing the conspiracy forming. You two are ganging up on me already? Is that a yes? Lucas pressed. That's a we'll see. We'll see means yes. Lucas turned to Lila. He always says we'll see when he's going to say yes later. Good to know, Lila said, her eyes twinkling. Watching them interact, Ethan felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness he hadn't felt in years. This was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just a place to live or a job to do, but a purpose that connected him to people he loved. 2 weeks after Lucas arrived, the insurance settlement from Dale's restitution came through. Lila stared at the check for a long time, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. $85,000, she said, her voice hushed. That's more than my father made in 5 years of farming. It's yours. You earned it through everything you survived. No, it's ours. You're part of this now. She looked at him. I want to do this right. Invest in equipment that'll last, upgrade the systems properly, maybe even hire some help so we're not doing everything ourselves. You want to expand? I want to build something sustainable, something that can support a family. She smiled. Our family. They spent the next week consulting with agricultural specialists, researching equipment, and planning how to transform the farm from a struggling operation into something that could thrive. Ethan discovered he had a knack for the business side of farming, analyzing costs, projecting yields, identifying inefficiencies that could be streamlined. You should consider getting your ag business certification, one of the consultants told him. You've got a natural head for this. The idea planted itself in Ethan's mind and started to grow. Maybe this could be more than just helping Lila. Maybe he could build a real career here, something that combined his mechanical skills with this new talent for management and organization. One afternoon, while Lucas was at a neighbor's farm learning about beekeeping, Ethan and Lila took a walk to the eastern boundary of her property. From there, they could see Dale Carver's land, all that pristine acreage sitting empty now, while its owner sat in a county jail awaiting sentencing. What's going to happen to his farm? Ethan asked. Bank's going to auction it off to pay his legal fees and restitution. Should happen in the next few months. They stood in silence for a moment, both thinking the same thing. We could buy it, Lila said quietly. With the settlement and a reasonable loan, we could probably afford at least part of it. That's a massive expansion. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm not sure about anything except that I want to build something bigger than just survival. My father always dreamed of expanding, of proving that ethical farming could compete with the corporate operations. This could be our chance to actually do it. Ethan looked at the land, imagining what it could become. We'd need help, hired hands, proper management systems, maybe even some specialized equipment. We'd need a partner who knows how to make it all work. She turned to him. Think you're up for it? Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you half of everything. Equal partners in building something that matters. The weight of what she was proposing settled over him. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about creating a legacy, the kind his own father had never managed to build. A foundation that could support Lucas and whatever future children might come along. A life that meant something beyond just getting by. Yes, he said. Let's do it. They shook hands formally, then laughed at the absurdity of it and hugged instead. When they pulled apart, Lila was grinning. We're going to need a business plan. Something solid enough to convince the bank that we can handle this kind of expansion. Then we'll build one. Together. Together, she agreed. The business plan took 3 weeks to complete. Ethan threw himself into it with the same intensity he'd brought to fixing tractors, researching everything from market trends to sustainable farming practices. He discovered that there was a growing demand for locally sourced organic produce, that consumers were increasingly willing to pay premium prices for food they knew came from ethical operations. Lila contributed her deep knowledge of the land, of what crops thrived in their specific soil and climate conditions. Together, they mapped out a 5-year plan that was ambitious but achievable, with clear milestones and realistic financial projections. When they finally presented it to the bank, Torres reviewed it with increasing interest. This is impressive work. You've clearly thought through every angle. We want to do this right, Ethan said. Not just for us, but for everyone who supported us when things were at their worst. This community deserves to see that their faith wasn't misplaced. Well, based on what I'm seeing here, I think we can work something out. The bank would be willing to extend a substantial agricultural development loan, especially given the restitution settlement is collateral. Torres smiled. Congratulations. You're about to become one of the largest farming operations in the county. When they left the bank, Lila grabbed Ethan's hand and squeezed it so hard his fingers went numb. We did it. We actually did it. We did it, he confirmed. That night they celebrated with Lucas, who was more excited about the prospect of having like 100 tractors than the actual business implications. Can I drive one when I'm bigger? He asked over ice cream. When you're bigger and properly trained, yes, Ethan said. And can I help with the harvest? Absolutely. Everyone helps with harvest. Lucas beamed. This is the best life ever. After Lucas went to bed, Ethan and Lila sat on the porch in the same spot where they'd had so many conversations over the past months. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I keep thinking about the day my truck broke down, Ethan said. How ready I was to just give up on everything. If I'd walked the other direction if I hadn't heard that tractor engine. But you did hear it. And you stayed. Lila leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you believe in fate? I didn't used to, but I'm starting to. Me too. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies dance in the fields, and Ethan thought about all the broken roads that had led him here. Every failure, every loss, every moment when he thought he couldn't keep going, all of it had been necessary to bring him to this porch, this woman, this life. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news about the expansion? You're basically a farming mogul now. Don't forget the little people. Ethan smiled and typed back, Never. Come visit sometime. We've got room. Might take you up on that. Good luck, brother. You earned this. He had earned it. They both had. Through stubbornness and sacrifice and refusing to give up, even when giving up was the rational choice. And now they were building something that would last. Not just for them, but for Lucas and whatever came after. I love you, Ethan said quietly. Lila lifted her head to look at him. I love you too, and I can't wait to see what we build together. Neither can I. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan made a wish and believed it might actually come true. The auction for Dale Carver's property was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late September, exactly 4 months after Ethan's truck had broken down on that dusty road. He stood in the county courthouse alongside Lila, both of them dressed in their best clothes, surrounded by a handful of other bidders who eyed the prize with varying degrees of interest. Ethan recognized a few faces, corporate agriculture representatives with deep pockets and vacant expressions, a land developer who'd been circling the county looking for opportunities, and surprisingly, Tom Brennan, the former farmhand whose testimony had helped bring Dale down. The auctioneer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like gravel, called the room to order. We're here today to auction the property formerly owned by Dale Carver, currently held by First National Bank, The parcel consists of 320 acres of prime agricultural land, including structures, equipment, and water rights. We'll start the bidding at $200,000. Lila's hand found Ethan's under the table and squeezed hard. They'd agreed on a maximum bid of $450,000, everything they could afford with the settlement money, their savings, and the loan the bank had approved. Going higher would stretch them too thin, leave them vulnerable to the kind of debt that had nearly destroyed Lila's father. $200,000, called the land developer immediately. $225, countered one of the corporate reps. The bidding climbed steadily, each increment raising the stakes. At $300,000, the developer dropped out with a disgusted shake of his head. At $350, two of the corporate bidders bowed out, leaving only one. $400,000, the remaining corporate bidder said, his tone bored and confident. Lila looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with question. He nodded, and she raised her hand. $425,000. The corporate bidder glanced at them for the first time, taking in their work-worn clothes and calloused hands. Something like amusement flickered across his face. $450. They were at their limit. Ethan felt Lila's hand trembling in his, saw the desperation creeping into her expression. They'd come so far, fought so hard, and now they were about to lose to someone who saw this land as nothing more than a line item on a balance sheet. Then Tom Brennan stood up. $500,000, he said clearly. The room went silent. The corporate bidder turned to stare at him, clearly trying to figure out who this nobody thought he was. The auctioneer raised his gavel. We have $500,000. Do I hear $525? The corporate bidder hesitated, then shook his head and sat down. He wasn't interested in a bidding war over what he probably considered marginal property anyway. $500,000 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to bidder number 12 for $500,000. Ethan felt his stomach drop. They'd lost. After everything, they'd lost. But then Tom Brennan walked over to their table and extended his hand to Lila. Miss Hart, I believe we need to talk. They met in a coffee shop across from the courthouse. Tom ordered 3 coffees and waited until they were seated before he spoke. I know what you're thinking, he said, but I didn't buy that land for myself. Then why did you buy it? Lila asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Because I owe you, both of you. Tom looked down at his coffee. I worked for Dale Carver for 6 years. I knew what he was doing was wrong, but I kept my mouth shut because I needed the job. I watched him destroy good people, ruin lives, and I did nothing. When I finally found the courage to speak up, it was almost too late to matter. Your testimony put him away, Ethan said. That matters? Maybe, but it doesn't undo the damage I helped cause. Tom pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. I bought the property with money I've been saving for years. Money I should have been using to stop Dale instead of hoarding for my own future. But I don't want to farm that land. I want to sell it to you. Lila opened the folder and saw a purchase agreement already drawn up, with her name and Ethan's listed as buyers. The price made her breath catch. $300,000, she read aloud. But you just paid $500. I paid what it took to keep it out of corporate hands. You'll pay what you can actually afford. The difference is my penance. Tom's expression was earnest, almost pleading. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but it's a start. Please, let me do this one right thing. Ethan and Lila looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between them in silence. This would change everything. $300,000 was within their reach, would leave them with reserves for equipment and operations. They could actually do this. Why? Lila asked finally. Why do you care this much? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Because my own father lost his farm 20 years ago to men like Dale. I watched it destroy him, watched him give up on everything he'd built. He died thinking he'd failed, and I never got to tell him that it wasn't his fault, that he'd been fighting a rigged system. He looked up, his eyes red. Your father was a good man, Miss Hart. Everyone knew it, and if I can help make sure his legacy survives, then maybe I can live with what I've done, or at least try to. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and took Tom's hand. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. I think I do. Tom smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Sign the papers, build something good, and maybe hire me when you need extra hands for harvest. I'm looking for honest work with people I can respect. Consider yourself hired, Ethan said, shaking his hand firmly. They signed the papers that afternoon with a lawyer who barely concealed his shock at the terms. By the end of the week, Lila and Ethan owned 640 acres of prime agricultural land, making them one of the largest independent farming operations in the county. The responsibility of it was staggering, but for the first time in his life, Ethan felt equal to the challenge. The expansion changed everything. They spent the next month working 18-hour days, coordinating equipment transfers, hiring staff, setting up new irrigation systems, and planning crop rotations that would maximize yield across both properties. Tom Brennan proved invaluable, his knowledge of Dale's land filling in gaps they hadn't known existed. They hired 3 full-time workers and contracted with a dozen seasonal laborers for harvest. Ethan designed a management system that distributed responsibility while maintaining quality control, and Lila worked with agricultural extension agents to develop sustainable farming practices that would preserve soil health for decades to come. Lucas adapted to his new reality with the flexibility of childhood. He made friends with the workers' kids, learned to drive a small utility vehicle under Ethan's supervision, and appointed himself official chicken feeder and farm ambassador. The neighbors who'd been skeptical of Lila's chances watched in amazement as the operation transformed from a struggling remnant into a thriving enterprise. One evening in early October, Ethan stood at the edge of what had been Dale's north field and was now theirs, watching the sun set over rows of young wheat that would be ready for harvest the following summer. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Lila approaching, 2 bottles of beer in her hands. "Thought you could use this," she said, passing him one. "You read my mind." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from gold to purple to deep blue. In the distance, they could hear Lucas laughing at something one of the workers had said, the sound carrying across the fields like a promise that better things were possible. "I've been thinking," Lila said finally, "about making this official." Ethan turned to her. "What do you mean?" "I mean us. This." She gestured at the land around them. "We're building a life together, raising Lucas together, running a business together, but we're still technically just, what? Partners? Friends who share a bed? I'd say we're a little more than that." "Exactly. So I'm asking, do you want to make it permanent? Get married, combine everything legally, build this future as an actual family instead of just people who happen to be in love and running a farm together?" Ethan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He'd been thinking the same thing for weeks, but hadn't found the courage to bring it up. "Are you proposing to me?" "I am. I know it's not traditional, but nothing about us has been traditional." She set down her beer and took both his hands. "Ethan Cole, will you marry me?" He pulled her close and kissed her, long and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling so wide his face hurt. "Yes, absolutely yes." Lila laughed, bright and joyful, and threw her arms around his neck. "We're getting married." "We're getting married," he confirmed, and the words felt like the truest thing he'd ever said. They told Lucas that night over dinner. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Does that mean Lila's going to be my mom?" Ethan glanced at Lila, seeing the emotion flood her face. "Well, you already have a mom buddy, even if she's not around. But Lila would be like a bonus mom. Someone who loves you and takes care of you and will always be here." "Like a real family?" "Exactly like a real family." Lucas considered this seriously, then nodded. "Okay, that's good. Can I be in the wedding?" "You can be the most important person in the wedding," Lila said, her voice thick. "Because none of this would matter without you." Lucas beamed. "Can I wear a suit?" "The best suit we can find," Ethan promised. They planned a simple ceremony for November, right after the first harvest from the expanded operation. Nothing fancy, just family, friends, and the community that had supported them through the worst of times. They'd get married in the field where they'd first worked side by side, where Ethan had promised to help save something he barely understood. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of preparation, both for the ceremony and for their first major harvest. They'd planted a mix of winter wheat, barley, and cover crops designed to rebuild the soil Dale had depleted through years of aggressive farming. The yields weren't spectacular, but they were solid, and more importantly, sustainable. Marcus drove down from the city to help coordinate the harvest, bringing his girlfriend and a camera because he insisted on documenting this chapter of Ethan's life. "This is a hell of a story," he said, snapping photos of the workers bringing in grain. "From broke mechanic to agricultural entrepreneur in 6 months. You could sell this to a magazine." "Not interested in fame," Ethan said. "Just interested in making it work. That's why it's working." "You actually care about this, not just the bottom line." Rebecca came down with her family, and watching her interact with Lucas, Ethan felt a rush of gratitude for everything she'd done. "He's thriving here," she said, watching her nephew chase chickens around the yard. "I've never seen him this happy. He's where he belongs. We all are." The night before the wedding, Ethan sat on the porch alone, taking stock of everything that had changed since that day his truck broke down. He thought about the man he'd been then, defeated, directionless, barely holding on. And he thought about who he'd become: a partner, a father, a businessman, someone who'd learned that strength came from knowing when to accept help and when to stand firm. Lila found him there and sat down beside him without a word. They'd developed a language of silence, an understanding that sometimes the most important things didn't need to be spoken. "Nervous?" she asked finally. "About tomorrow? No. About whether I can actually be the husband and father I want to be? Terrified. That's how I know you'll be great at it. The people who should be scared usually aren't." She took his hand. "We're going to mess this up sometimes. Fight about stupid things, make mistakes, question whether we're doing it right, but we'll figure it out together." "Together," he agreed. "I like the sound of that." "Me too." They sat there until the stars came out, planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather with leaves just beginning to turn. They'd set up chairs in the field, a simple wooden arch wound with late-season flowers, and a sound system playing soft music as guests arrived. Ethan stood at the front with Lucas beside him, both of them in matching dark suits. His son kept fidgeting with his tie, excited and nervous in equal measure. "Do I look okay, Dad?" "You look perfect, buddy." "Are you scared?" "A little, but good scared, like when you're about to do something amazing and you know it's going to change everything." Lucas thought about this. "Like when we moved here?" Exactly like that. The music shifted and everyone stood. Lila appeared at the far end of the aisle and Ethan's breath caught. She wore a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers from her own fields. She'd never looked more beautiful. As she walked toward him, Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Every obstacle they'd overcome, every moment when they could have given up but didn't, every small victory that had built toward this larger triumph. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been worth it. When Lila reached the front, she handed her bouquet to Rebecca and took both of Ethan's hands. The minister began speaking, but Ethan barely heard the words. He was too focused on Lila's face, on the joy and love and determination he saw there. When it came time for vows, Lila went first. "Ethan, when you showed up at my farm that day, I thought you were just another problem I didn't need, another complication in a life that was already falling apart." She smiled through tears. "But you taught me that the best things in life usually start as problems. You showed me that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. I promise to be your partner in everything, to fight beside you when times are hard, and to celebrate with you when times are good. I promise to love Lucas like my own and to build a home where all of us can thrive. And I promise that no matter what challenges we face, we'll face them together." Ethan's voice was rough when he spoke. "Lila, I came to this farm as a man who'd forgotten what it meant to have purpose. I'd lost my job, my direction, my belief that I had anything valuable to offer the world. And then I met you, this fierce, stubborn, incredible woman who is fighting impossible odds with nothing but determination and heart. You gave me a reason to be better. You showed me that it's never too late to build something that matters. I promise to be the partner you deserve, the father Lucas needs, and the man I want to be. I promise to work beside you building this life we've started. And I promise that for as long as I'm breathing, you'll never have to fight alone again." They exchanged rings, simple bands that Lila had made from melted down silver coins her father had collected, each one representing a year of his farming life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan kissed his wife while Lucas jumped up and down with excitement, and in that moment, surrounded by people who'd helped them survive and thrive, he felt completely and perfectly whole. The reception was held in the barn they'd restored together, with tables full of food contributed by neighbors and friends. Tom Brennan gave a toast that had everyone in tears, talking about redemption and second chances. Marcus gave a toast that had everyone laughing, threatening to write a book about Ethan's transformation. And Rebecca gave a toast that acknowledged how far her brother had come, how proud she was of the man he'd become. When Lucas gave his toast, standing on a chair so everyone could see him, his words were simple but perfect. I'm really happy that Lila's my bonus mom now. And I'm really happy we live here. And I'm really happy Dad's not sad anymore. The end. As the sun set and the party continued, Ethan pulled Lila aside for a private moment. They stood in the doorway of the barn, watching their community celebrate, and he felt something settle deep in his chest. What are you thinking? Lila asked. That 6 months ago, I was ready to give up on everything, and now I have more than I ever dreamed of having. We both do. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if my truck hadn't broken down that day? Sometimes. But then I remembered that it wasn't just luck. You heard that tractor engine and you came to investigate instead of walking away. You offered to help instead of asking for handouts. You stayed when it got hard instead of running. Those were choices, not accidents. We both made choices. The right ones. She kissed him softly. And we'll keep making them. Every single day. The first year of their marriage brought challenges they hadn't anticipated. The expanded operation required constant attention. And there were times when they went days barely seeing each other despite living under the same roof. They learned to communicate better, to carve out time for family even when the work demanded everything. They learned to fight fair, to apologize quickly, to never let resentment build. Lucas struggled initially with the idea of Lila as a parental figure, testing boundaries and occasionally acting out. But Lila met every challenge with patience and consistency, slowly earning his trust and respect. By the following spring, he was calling her mom without prompting, and the word came naturally. The farm prospered beyond their projections. Their commitment to sustainable practices attracted attention from restaurants and food co-ops looking for ethically sourced products. They secured contracts that provided stable income and allowed them to hire more local workers. The community that had once watched Lila struggle now pointed to her operation as proof that small farms could not only survive, but thrive in the modern agricultural landscape. Dale Carver was sentenced to 7 years in prison and permanent prohibition from owning agricultural property. His legal fees and restitution payments bankrupted him completely. Ethan felt no satisfaction in the man's downfall, only relief that he could no longer hurt people. On their first anniversary, Ethan and Lila took Lucas on a trip to the coast, something none of them had done before. They spent 3 days exploring tide pools, eating fresh seafood, and simply being a family away from the constant demands of the farm. On the last evening, as they watched the sunset from the beach, Lucas asked, "Dad, are you glad your truck broke down?" Ethan looked at Lila, who smiled back at him with complete understanding. "Best thing that ever happened to me, buddy. Even though it was really bad at the time?" Especially because it was really bad at the time. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. You just have to be brave enough to see them through. Lucas nodded thoughtfully, then went back to building his sandcastle, satisfied with the answer. That night, after Lucas was asleep in the hotel room, Ethan and Lila stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean. The sound of waves provided a rhythm they didn't have back home, a different kind of peace. "I'm pregnant," Lila said suddenly. Ethan turned to her, his heart stopping. "What?" "I found out yesterday. Didn't want to tell you until we were away from everything else. Somewhere we could just be with it." She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of joy and nervousness. "We're going to have a baby." Ethan pulled her into his arms, emotion overwhelming him. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her face. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, excited, completely overwhelmed." She laughed, "But mostly just grateful for all of this. For us." "Me too." They stood there holding each other, listening to the ocean and imagining the future that was unfolding before them. Another child, another chance to get it right, another piece of the life they were building together. Their daughter was born the following spring in the same county hospital where Lila had been born 30 years earlier. They named her Sarah, after Lila's mother, and she came into the world with her mother's determination and her father's steady gaze. Lucas was instantly smitten with his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bottle feeding. He took his role as big brother seriously, already planning all the things he would teach her about the farm when she was old enough. Ethan held his daughter for the first time and felt the same overwhelming love he'd felt when Lucas was born. But now it was layered with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a father. He wasn't just providing for his children. He was building a legacy they could be proud of, a home where they could grow into whoever they wanted to be. The farm continued to flourish. They expanded into organic vegetables, started a small orchard, and even experimented with heritage breed livestock. Each new venture was carefully planned and sustainably implemented, always with an eye toward long-term viability rather than quick profits. Ethan completed his agricultural business certification through a combination of online courses and practical experience. The same consultants who'd initially advised them now sent other struggling farmers his way, and he found himself mentoring people who were in the same desperate situation he'd been in years before. "Pay it forward," he told each of them. "Someone gave me a chance when I had nothing to offer but broken equipment and desperation. If I can do that for someone else, then maybe we start changing how this whole system works." On Sarah's first birthday, they threw a party that half the county attended. The farm had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of what was possible when people refused to give up, when community came together, when hard work and integrity meant more than easy money and exploitation. As Ethan stood watching his family and friends celebrate, Marcus approached him with a knowing smile. "You did it," Marcus said. "Built exactly what you needed." "We did it, all of us." Ethan looked around at the faces that had become family. Tom working the grill, Rebecca chasing Lucas through the yard, Lila holding Sarah, and laughing at something one of the neighbors said. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." That's the point, though, isn't it? You learn to stop trying to do everything alone. Hardest lesson I ever learned, and the most important. That evening, after everyone had gone home and both children were asleep, Ethan and Lila walked the property like they did every night before bed. It was their ritual, their way of staying connected to the land and to each other. They stopped at the spot where they'd first worked together on that dying tractor, where everything had started to change. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Lila asked. "When you offered to stay and help? That I needed to be someone my son could be proud of. And are you?" Ethan thought about Lucas, who was growing into a confident, compassionate young man, who understood the value of hard work and the importance of treating people with dignity, who'd learned that family wasn't just about blood, but about who showed up and stayed when times got hard. "I hope so. I'm trying to be." "You are. You absolutely are." Lila took his hand. "And you know what else? You became someone you could be proud of, too. That might be even more important." She was right. The man he'd been when his truck broke down, defeated, directionless, barely hanging on, would barely recognize the person he'd become. He'd found purpose not just in fixing equipment, but in building something that would outlast him, in creating a home where his children could thrive, in being the kind of partner who showed up every single day, even when every single day was hard. "What are you thinking about?" Lila asked. "About how grateful I am that my truck died that day. About how the worst moment of my life led to the best things in it." He pulled her close. "About how lucky I am to have found you. We found each other, and we chose each other every day after that. Best decision I ever made." They stood there in the darkness, surrounded by the land they'd fought so hard to save, listening to the quiet sounds of the farm settling in for the night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Wind rustled through the wheat fields. The house behind them glowed with warm light, filled with the sleeping forms of their children. This was home. This was family. This was the life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope, and the willingness to keep fighting when everything said they should quit. And as Ethan stood there with his wife in his arms and his future stretching out before him like those endless fields, He knew with absolute certainty that every broken road, every closed door, every moment of despair had been worth it. Because they'd led him here, to this farm, to this woman, to this life, to exactly where he was always meant to be.